Imagine this scenario, and this actually happened a few years ago. A massive, multi-million-dollar healthcare organization decides to upgrade their archiving system.
Right, which sounds like just a routine logistics job.
Exactly, just a routine job. So they hire a moving company to transport physical backup tapes from one data center to another. But during the drives, the back of the truck just pops open.
Oh, no.
Yeah, and a heavy, unmarked storage case falls out right onto the highway. And inside that case, unencrypted backup tapes containing the personal health records of over 1 million patients.
That is just, I mean, it's a worst-case scenario.
The total nightmare. And it wasn't a sophisticated cyber attack. No one hacked a firewall. But that single physical box tumbling onto the asphalt resulted in catastrophic API violations, millions of dollars in fines, and a permanent stain on their reputation.
Well, the irony of modern cybersecurity is that we spend millions on next-generation firewalls, zero-trust architectures, and advanced threat hunting algorithms. Yet we frequently lose the battle because we simply lose track of the actual data we are trying to protect.
Right, we forget the basics.
Exactly. I mean, a physical perimeter or a complex encryption scheme is completely useless if you don't even know what you're supposed to be protecting, where it physically sits, or who is legally accountable for it.
Welcome to this comprehensive audio overview, our deep dive into Domain 2 asset security for the CISSP exam. We are working through a massive stack of official study guides, instructional transcripts, and foundational security texts today.
And it is a vital domain to understand.
It really is. Now, if you are looking at the exam blueprint right now, you might notice that this domain only represents about 10% of the test. So you might be tempted to just, skim it and jump ahead to the more glamorous topics like cryptography or penetration testing.
Which is a huge mistake.
Huge. So our mission today is to demonstrate why that 10% is the absolute bedrock foundation of everything else in cybersecurity. You literally cannot secure a network architecture, manage identities, or run security operations if you haven't mastered how to protect information and assets throughout their entire life cycle.
Because knowledge is most valuable when it is deeply understood and applied to real-world infrastructure. The core philosophy of this domain is that security is never a static snapshot.
Right, it's constantly moving.
Yeah, it is a continuous cradle-to-grave life cycle. Every single datagram traversing your network, every corporate laptop, and every printed quarterly report has a birth, a working life, and eventually a required death. The frameworks we are going to explore today dictate the rules of that entire journey.
Okay, let's unpack this from the absolute beginning, because you can't protect an asset if you don't know it exists, what it is, or what it is worth. So the absolute first step in asset security is identification and classification.
Without it.
And I know we divide assets into tangible and intangible categories. Tangible assets are obvious, right? The servers, the endpoints, the fiber optic cables, the actual brick and mortar facilities. But valuing the intangible assets seems like a much darker art.
It is. Valuing intangibles is incredibly difficult, but they often represent the vast majority of a modern organization's actual worth. We're talking about intellectual property, proprietary software source code, trade secrets, patents, and customer databases.
And it goes beyond just data files, right? Like reputation.
Oh, absolutely. It goes heavily into concepts like brand reputation and goodwill. Consider a major credit bureau. If an attacker steals their database, the physical cost of the servers they compromised is negligible.
Right, a few $1,000s in hardware.
Exactly. The real damage is the loss of consumer trust. How do you put a price tag on a brand's reputation? You have to calculate the potential loss of future revenue, the cost of regulatory fines, and the massive legal settlements.
That sounds incredibly complex.
It is, but that total number is the true value of that intangible asset.
Which brings us to how we categorize the data itself. The source materials draw a very sharp, highly testable line between how government and military organizations classify data versus how the private sector does it.
Yeah, and that distinction comes down to the ultimate impact of unauthorized disclosure. In the government and military context, the definitions are rigid and tied directly to national security. They use a tiered system.
Starting at the top, right.
Right. At the highest level, you have top secret.
And the texts are very specific about the phrasing here. Disclosing top secret data could cause exceptionally grave damage to national security. We're talking about things like active troop movements, spy satellite schematics, or nuclear launch protocols.
Yes, and the phrasing exceptionally grave damage is exactly what you need to remember for the exam.
Yeah.
It is a highly specific legal standard.
Right.
Moving one tier down, we have secret, where unauthorized disclosure could cause serious damage. Below that is confidential, which could cause measurable damage. And finally, unclassified.
But wait, unclassified doesn't mean I can just post it on Twitter, right?
No, definitely not. Unclassified data isn't necessarily public. It simply means the data isn't sensitive enough to warrant a national security classification, though it might still be tagged as FOUO for official use only.
Got it. Then we shift gears and look at the business side. Corporations don't use military classifications. They use labels like confidential or proprietary, private, sensitive, and public.
Right, a completely different vocabulary.
Yeah. And I think about data classification in a corporate setting, like sorting laundry. You wouldn't throw a delicate silk tie into a hot wash with muddy jeans. They need entirely different handling.
That's a great way to visualize it.
But here is my pushback on the corporate model. Isn't it highly subjective to decide what serious damage means in a corporate setting compared to a government setting? Like, a leaked screenplay for a superhero movie isn't exactly a threat to global stability.
What's fascinating here is how organizations are forced to define those boundaries based entirely on their unique risk appetite and competitive landscape. In a business, exceptionally grave damage doesn't mean a war. It means bankruptcy.
Oh, I
It
see.
means a total loss of market share or a regulatory fine. So massive the company just folds. So a movie studio might label that unreleased screenplay as confidential or proprietary.
Because if it leaks, the damage is financial.
Exactly. If that script leaks, rival studios might rush a competing project to market, or fans might lose interest, costing the studio hundreds of millions in box office revenue. The damage is relative to the organization's mission.
That makes perfect sense. And what about the private label? How does that differ from proprietary?
Private typically covers internal personnel and operational data that would cause serious internal damage or legal liability if leaked. Think employee payroll information, internal HR complaints, or medical leave records.
So it's private to the actual individuals within the company?
Precisely. Then you have sensitive data, which requires extraordinary precautions to ensure its confidentiality and integrity, often because it's tied to strict financial compliance.
And public is just what it sounds like.
Yeah, public data is your marketing brochures or your public website. There is no confidentiality damage if your website is viewed by the public. In fact, that's the goal. However, you still want to protect its integrity so an attacker can't deface your homepage.
I want to zoom in on that sensitive category because the text heavily emphasizes two specific acronyms that everyone taking this exam needs to know backward and forward: PII and PHI. Let's define the actual mechanics of these.
Absolutely. PII stands for Personally Identifiable Information. According to NIST standards, PII is any information that can be used to distinguish or trace an individual's identity.
So like names and social security numbers.
Right, those are the obvious ones. It also includes biometric records like fingerprints, but it goes further. It also includes data that can be linked to a specific person when combined with other data, like their financial history, medical history, or even specific geographic location data.
And PHI is protected health information.
Which is fiercely protected under HEMPATEA, the Health Insurance Portability and Accountability Act in the United States. PHI is any health-related information linked to a specific identifiable person.
Which hospitals obviously have to deal with.
Yes, but a crucial trap many organizations fall into is believing that only doctors and hospitals must protect PHI.
Wait, really? Who else?
Well, if your company self-funds an employee healthcare plan, or if your HR department handles medical leave paperwork containing actual diagnoses, your organization is handling PHI and is subject to strict regulatory controls.
Oh, wow. I bet a lot of small businesses mess that up. So once we have triaged our data into these categories, we have to perform asset valuation. We have to decide what the necessary security controls will actually cost.
Yes, the budget is always a factor.
And the text points us right back to the foundational CIA triad: confidentiality, integrity, and availability. We evaluate how sensitive the data is, how critical its accuracy is, and how essential its uptime is to business operations.
Which creates a deeply complex operational puzzle, honestly. Consider a scenario where a system processes data that requires an incredibly high level of confidentiality, say, a database of undercover intelligence operatives.
Okay, super high confidentiality.
Right. However, the availability requirement is actually quite low. If the database goes offline for a few hours, it's a major inconvenience, but no one's cover is blown. How do you categorize the server that holds this data?
The sources mention a concept called the high watermark. I assume this dictates the baseline.
Exactly. The high watermark concept mandates that you must protect the entire system to the highest level of any single data element it processes or stores.
Oh, so the highest requirement wins.
Always. If a server touches top-secret data, even for a millisecond, that entire server must be classified, secured, and physically isolated as a top-secret asset. The classification of the physical asset must always align with the highest classification of the data it handles.
So you cannot put a top-secret database on an unclassified server.
Never.
So if an executive accidentally downloads a proprietary, highly sensitive merger document onto their personal, unmanaged iPad, that iPad instantly hits the high water mark and becomes a highly sensitive corporate asset that needs to be seized and wiped.
From a strict security policy perspective, yes, absolutely. And this introduces a cardinal rule of security evaluation. You must never spend more to protect an asset than the asset is actually worth, but you also cannot underprotect a highly valuable asset.
Right, it's a balancing act.
If a quantitative risk assessment determines that a database breach would cost your company $10 million in fines, lost revenue, and brand damage, spending $1 million a year on encryption and monitoring to secure it is a sound investment.
But if you spend $15 million...
Right, spending $15 million to secure a $10 million asset is a fundamental failure of governance.
Okay, let's follow that thread of governance. We know what the data is worth, and we know how it's classified. But assets don't protect themselves. Firewalls don't configure themselves. Humans do.
Exactly. People drive the processes.
So we need to assign strict accountability. The sources build out a very specific ecosystem of data roles. I want to dive into how these roles actually function in the real world, starting at the very top with the data owner, sometimes called the information owner.
The data owner is the individual who holds the ultimate legal and organizational responsibility for the information. And in a corporate environment, this is rarely someone in the IT department. Yeah, it is usually a C-level executive or the head of a specific business unit. The VP of Human Resources is the data owner for the employee database. The chief financial officer is the data owner for the financial ledgers.
Right. They aren't the ones in the server room running CT6 cables or configuring the SQL database.
No. Their role is entirely strategic and policy-driven. They set the rules. They determine the initial classification of the data. They dictate the acceptable use policies. And most importantly, they define the access criteria like who is actually allowed to see this information.
Because it's their data.
Exactly. And because they make these determinations, they bear the ultimate liability if a breach occurs due to negligence.
Then we have the system owner or the asset owner. If the data owner owns the information, what does the system owner do?
The system owner is responsible for the actual hardware, software, and physical infrastructure that processes the data owner's information.
So they own the box it sits in.
Pretty much. Let's say the VP of HR owns the employee data. That data sits on a cluster of servers running a specific HR application. The director of IT infrastructure might be the system owner for those servers.
Gotcha.
They're responsible for writing the system security plans, ensuring the operating systems are patched, managing the hardware lifecycle, and ensuring the physical security of the server racks.
I'm looking at this list of roles, and the line between a system owner and our next role, the data custodian, seems a bit blurry. Like, if the system owner is responsible for the server, aren't they the ones actually applying the patches and running the backups?
The distinction really lies in delegation and daily execution. The system owner is a management role. They ensure the plan exists and is fully funded.
Okay.
The data custodian is the technical staff. The system administrators, the network engineers, the database admins, they are the ones who execute the plan on a daily basis. The data owner and system owner dictate the policy. The data custodian implements the policy. The custodian configures the firewalls, executes the daily tape backups, and manages the Active Directory access control lists.
So it's like owning a car. As the data owner, it's my car. I take it to the mechanic, the custodian, to change the oil and the brakes, but the mechanic doesn't get to decide who drives it or when to sell it.
That is exactly it. They do the heavy lifting, but they do not have the authority to decide who gets access or what the data is initially classified as.
Next, we have to tackle two roles that have become massively important over the last decade, primarily because of global privacy laws like the GDPR in Europe. I'm talking about the data controller and the data processor. The exam sources focus heavily on the legal distinctions between these two.
And rightfully so. The introduction of the GDPR fundamentally shifted how we view data accountability globally. A data controller is the entity, usually a company or organization, that determines the purpose and the means of processing personal data.
So they decide the why and the how.
Exactly. They decide why the data is being collected and how it will be used.
So if my company, let's call it Acme Corp., collects the names, addresses, and banking details of our employees to run payroll. Acme Corp is the data controller. We decided we needed the data to pay our people.
Correct. You have the direct relationship with the data subjects, your employees. Now, what if Acme Corp doesn't want to build its own payroll software?
Which most companies don't.
Right. What if you sign a contract with a massive third-party cloud HR platform to handle all your payroll processing? You take all that sensitive employee data and upload it to their cloud servers.
Okay.
That third-party cloud provider is the data processor.
Because they are processing the data on behalf of the controller.
Exactly. The data processor acts strictly on the documented instructions of the data controller. They are providing a service. Crucially, the processor cannot suddenly decide to take Acme Corp's employee data and use it to train their own proprietary artificial intelligence models or sell that data to marketers.
Right, because they don't own the data, they just process it. But this brings up a huge real-world issue with cloud computing. The shared responsibility model. As a data controller, I outsource the processing to AWS or Azure or a SaaS provider. I make them the processor.
Right.
But what happens if they get breached? If the cloud provider forgets to secure an S3 bucket and all my employee data is leaked, can I just point the finger at them and tell the regulators, hey, it wasn't my fault, go find the cloud provider?
Absolutely not. The regulatory bodies are incredibly clear on this. You can outsource the operational work, but you can never outsource the ultimate accountability.
Oh, wow.
Yeah, if you are the data controller, you hold the primary liability to the data subjects. If your chosen cloud provider is breached, the regulators are coming after you first.
Because you chose them.
Exactly. It was your responsibility to perform due diligence, to ensure your contracts were ironclad, and to verify that the processor was actually securing the data to your required standards. You might be able to sue the processor later for breach of contract, but in the eyes of the law and the public, the failure belongs to the controller.
Okay, that makes sense. Now, the sources also mentioned the DPO, the Data Protection Officer. This isn't just a regular security analyst, is it?
No, not at all. A DPO is a formal, independent leadership role mandated by the GDPR for certain types of organizations, particularly those processing large volumes of sensitive personal data.
What do they actually do?
The DPO acts as an independent advocate for the data subjects within the organization. They monitor compliance, they advise on privacy impact assessments, and they act as the primary liaison with supervisory authorities.
So they're kind of like an internal watchdog.
Exactly. And crucially, they must be allowed to operate independently. They usually report directly to the highest level of management, like the board of directors, to prevent a conflict of interest.
Right, like where a CIO might try to cover up a breach to save their job.
Precisely.
We also have data stewards. How is a steward different from a custodian?
A data custodian is focused on technical execution, backups, patching, access control. A data steward is focused on data governance, data quality, and business logic.
Okay, so less technical, more operational.
Right. They ensure the data is accurate, properly formatted, and adheres to business rules. If you have a massive CRM database, the custodian makes sure the database server is running and secure. The steward makes sure the sales team isn't entering duplicate customer records or formatting phone numbers incorrectly, which would corrupt the integrity of the data.
Think about your own organization chart as you listen to this. Who holds these roles in your company? Because if you don't know who the data owner is for a specific application, you have a massive security gap.
You really do.
Now, once we know who is accountable, we have to look at how they manage the physical and digital footprint of these assets every single day. This brings us to provisioning, handling, and asset management.
And the foundational step in daily management is asset discovery. It sounds simple, but in large enterprise environments, it is incredibly difficult.
I can imagine.
Organizations must establish and maintain a configuration management database, or a CMDB. This is a centralized repository that tracks every single hardware device, software license, virtual machine, and data flow in the environment.
The sources note a staggering statistic here, actually. They say companies waste up to 5% of their massive IT budgets simply maintaining unused hardware, orphaned cloud instances, and redundant software licenses. It is the plague of shadow IT.
And shadow IT is a nightmare for security teams. It occurs when business units just bypass the formal IT procurement process.
Because IT takes too long.
Exactly. The marketing department gets tired of waiting for IT to provision a server, so they just use a corporate credit card to spin up their own cloud environment to host a new campaign. Central IT has no idea it exists.
And if IT doesn't know it exists, they aren't patching it, they aren't monitoring it for intrusions, and they certainly aren't backing it up.
which creates a massive, unmonitored attack surface. Attackers love shadow IT because it's usually poorly secured. To combat this, security teams must deploy active and passive network discovery scanners to constantly sweep the network ranges.
Just looking for anything new.
Right, looking for unauthorized IP addresses or unknown MZ addresses. They monitor outbound web traffic for connections to unsanctioned cloud storage providers. It requires constant vigilance.
Here's where it gets really interesting, though. I want to dig into a specific type of asset mismanagement. The sources highlight virtual machine sprawl.
VM sprawl.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Now, I've heard people explain this by saying it's like a massive mansion where you leave the lights and the air conditioning on in all 50 rooms, but you only live in the kitchen. It wastes electricity. But from a technical security standpoint, it's far more dangerous than just a high electricity bill, isn't it?
The mansion analogy captures the resource waste perfectly, but you're right, it misses the critical security mechanism. Virtual machines operate on a hypervisor, the underlying software that allocates physical CPU and RAM to the virtual servers. When developers spin up a VM to test a piece of code, they often forget to spin it down when they are finished. That orphan VM continues to consume expensive hypervisor resources. But the real danger is that this VM is still connected to your internal network.
And it's just sitting there.
Just sitting there. Because it's forgotten, it falls completely out of the automated patch management cycle. 6 months later, a critical vulnerability is discovered in the OS of that forgotten VM. It is now a wide-open backdoor.
Wow. So an attacker finds it.
An attacker compromises that forgotten VM, establishes a foothold, and uses it to pivot laterally across your network into your production databases. This is why strict provisioning and, equally important, automated deprovisioning processes are mandatory.
The text also outlines specific asset handling requirements. How do we secure the storage and transport of these assets? They make a very deliberate distinction between labels and markings.
Yes. A label is generally a system-readable, permanent identifier integrated into the asset. Think of a digital classification tag embedded in a file's metadata that a firewall can read, or a permanent standardized barcode physically affixed to the chassis of a server.
Okay, so it's for the machines.
Right. A marking, on the other hand, is human-readable. It is designed to immediately alert a person to the sensitivity of the object. It's the bright red top-secret physical sticker on the outside of a hard drive, or the bold confidential watermark splashed diagonally across the background of a printed HR report.
So you really need both.
You absolutely need both. The computer needs the label to enforce the technical policy, and the human needs the marking to understand the handling procedures.
And when it comes to granting those humans access to these assets, we rely on two foundational principles that get confused all the time: need to know and least privilege. If you are studying for the exam right now, you have to understand the technical difference between these two.
They are completely distinct concepts. Let's break them apart. Need to know is entirely focused on the justification for accessing an object or information. Do you have a legitimate authorized business requirement to see this specific file?
Like, do you literally need to know this to do your job?
Exactly. Even if you have the highest level top secret clearance in the organization, if you don't explicitly need to see the schematics for Project X to perform your daily duties, you are denied access to Project X. Need to know dictates whether you are allowed through the door in the first place.
Okay, and least privilege?
Least privilege applies after you get through the door. It is about granular permissions and actions. Once you are granted access based on need to know, what exactly are you allowed to do with that information?
Like reading versus editing.
Yes. If your job only requires you to read specific document, you are granted read-only privilege. You are not granted write, edit, or delete privileges. You are provided the absolute minimum level of system rights necessary to execute your specific task. Need to know grants the access. Least privilege constrains the actions.
That makes it really clear. There is one more handling principle that I think is brilliant because it is so fundamentally simple. Data collection limitation, also known as data minimization.
It's a very powerful concept.
Right. Because the absolute easiest, most foolproof way to protect data is to simply not collect it in the first place. If a customer is buying a pair of socks from your e-commerce website, you need their shipping address and their credit card. You do absolutely not need their social security number or their mother's maiden name.
Exactly.
If the data lacks a clear, justifiable business purpose, do not ask for it.
Because every single piece of sensitive data you collect is a liability. I like to think of it as digital toxic waste. Once you collect it, you are legally obligated to store it securely, encrypt it, monitor access to it, and you will be penalized heavily if you lose it.
So the whole collect everything just in case strategy is dead.
The era of companies hoarding massive amounts of customer data just in case they want to mine it for marketing later is over. Data minimization is a core, legally enforceable principle of modern privacy regulations, like the GDPR and the CCPA in California.
So daily management, provisioning, and access controls are great, but they really only represent a snapshot in time. To truly secure an organization's assets, we have to look at the macro view. We have to protect assets from the exact second they are created until their ultimate final destruction.
The entire life cycle.
Right. Let's walk through the data lifecycle and the distinct states data can exist in.
The data life cycle generally consists of 5 chronological stages. Stage 1 is creation or collection, when the data is generated internally by an employee or enters the organization from an external source.
Okay, birth of the data.
Right. Stage 2 is classification and storage, evaluating its sensitivity, tagging it, and placing it in a secure repository. Stage 3 is use, when the data is actively being viewed, processed, or modified to achieve business goals.
Makes sense.
Stage 4 is archiving, moving the data out of active production and into long-term storage for legal, historical, or compliance reasons. And finally, Stage 5 is destruction, the permanent eradication of the data when it is no longer needed.
And the exam materials map these life cycle stages directly to 3 specific data states. Data is always in one of these 3 states at any given moment. First up is data at rest.
Data at rest is data sitting quietly on a physical storage medium. It is not currently being accessed or transmitted. It's sitting on a laptop's solid-state drive, on an external USB thumb drive, on a backup tape in a vault, or on a SAN, a storage area network.
But let's define SAN for our listeners who might not be storage engineers. A SAN isn't just a big hard drive put into a server, right?
No, not at all. A SAN is a dedicated high-speed network that provides servers with block-level access to massive storage arrays. It makes a remote array of hard drives appear to the server's operating system as if it were a locally attached drive.
And how do we protect it?
When protecting data at rest, whether on a single laptop or a massive SAN, our primary mechanism is strong symmetric encryption, like AES-256. We encrypt the entire disk. If a thief steals the physical hard drive from the laptop or pulls a drive out of the SAN array, the data is completely useless ciphertext without the decryption key.
Got it. The second state is data in transit, also known as data in motion. This is data actively moving across a network. It could be traveling across an internal Ethernet cable between 2 servers, or traversing the public internet between a user's browser and a cloud application.
For data in transit, we must protect against eavesdropping, interception, and man-in-the-middle attacks. We rely on transport encryption. For web traffic, we use TLS transport layer security.
How does TLS actually secure that connection mechanically?
TLS uses a hybrid approach. When your browser connects to a secure website, it initiates a TLS handshake. It uses asymmetric cryptography, public and private keys, to securely verify the server's identity and exchange a shared secret key.
Okay, so it sets up a secure tunnel first.
Exactly. Once that shared secret is established, the connection switches to symmetric cryptography, which is much faster, to encrypt the actual payload of the data flowing back and forth.
And for network-level traffic, like connecting a remote branch office to the corporate headquarters.
For that, we often use IPsec Internet Protocol Security, which operates at the network layer to encapsulate and encrypt the actual IP packets themselves, usually forming the basis of a VPN, a virtual private network.
This brings us to the third state, which I find the most problematic data in use. This is data actively residing in a computer's volatile memory in the RAM, being processed by the CPU or an application.
It is definitely the trickiest state.
I have a major concern here. If the data has to be unencrypted and unlocked in the RAM for the CPU to actually read the ones and zeros and do the math, aren't we incredibly vulnerable at that exact moment? The encryption we use for data at rest and data in transit is completely bypassed once the application opens the file.
You have identified the historical Achilles heel of information security. Data in use is inherently the most vulnerable state because, traditionally, it must exist in clear text in the memory for the application to interact with it.
So if a hacker gets in,
An attacker who compromises the operating system can simply execute a memory scraping attack, dumping the contents of the RAM to extract clear text passwords, credit card numbers, or cryptographic keys.
So how do we defend it if we can't encrypt it while it's working?
We have to surround the data in use with mitigating controls. First, we enforce strict input validation during the creation phase. We ensure that malicious code, like a buffer overflow exploit, cannot be injected into the application's memory space.
Right, keep the bad stuff out of the RAM to begin with.
Exactly. Second, secure software development practices mandate memory flushing. As soon as an application is finished processing a highly sensitive credit card number, the code must be written to immediately overwrite that specific sector of RAM with zeros. It shouldn't just sit there in memory waiting to be scraped.
Are there any emerging technologies that actually solve this at the encryption level?
Yes, the frontier of this problem is homomorphic encryption. It is a highly complex cryptographic breakthrough that allows a computer to perform mathematical operations and searches on ciphertext without ever decrypting it first.
Wait, really? How is that even possible?
It's intense mathematics. The CPU processes the encrypted data, generates an encrypted result, and only the owner with the private key can decrypt the final answer. It is incredibly CPU-intensive and slow right now, but it is the holy grail for securing data in the use in cloud environments.
Because data is so vulnerable across these different shifting states, organizations can't just guess at what security they need. They can't rely on ad hoc configurations. We have to implement structured frameworks and advanced technologies. Let's look at security controls and compliance.
You never start with a blank sheet of paper. You start with a recognized industry standard or framework. If you are a U.S. federal agency, you use NIST SP 853. If you process credit cards globally, you are legally bound to the PCI DSS, the Payment Card Industry Data Security Standard. These frameworks provide a documented baseline.
The baseline.
Yes, a baseline is a comprehensive list of the lowest acceptable level of security configurations and controls required to protect a system.
But a baseline is just the starting point, right? I mean, a massive international bank's baseline needs to look very different than a regional hospital's baseline, which looks different than a small bakery's baseline.
Oh, entirely different.
We'd have to adjust this massive list of rules using two specific processes, scoping and tailoring. Let's define the mechanical difference between those two because they sound very similar.
They do, but they serve different functions. Scoping is the process of removing controls that simply do not apply to your environment. You are defining the boundaries of the system.
Give me an example.
For example, if the PCI DSS baseline mandates strict security controls for securing wireless Wi-Fi networks, but your secure data center strictly prohibits Wi-Fi and uses only hardwired connections, you scope out or remove the wireless controls from your audit requirements. They are completely out of scope.
Got it. Scoping is deletion. What is tailoring?
Tailoring is the process of customizing and adjusting the controls that do remain in scope so they fit your specific organizational mission and risk profile. You are modifying the parameters.
So tweaking the rules.
Yes. For instance, the baseline framework might state broadly, the organization must enforce password expiration. Tailoring is where your security architects decide, based on our specific threat model, our passwords will expire every 60 days and they must be 14 characters long. You are tailoring the generic control to fit your specific operational environment.
Once we have our scoped and tailored baseline, we need to deploy technological solutions to actually enforce these rules and protect the data. The exam sources highlight three major technology suites. First up, DLP, data loss prevention.
DLP systems are the ultimate gatekeepers for sensitive data. They are designed to inspect data in all three states and block unauthorized exfiltration.
How do they actually spot the data, though?
They use deep packet inspection, regular expressions, and pattern matching to look for sensitive information. If it sees a string of numbers formatted as a social security number, 3 digits dash, 2 digits dash, 4 digits, or credit card algorithm, it takes action based on policy.
The text mentions three primary deployments of DLP network, endpoint, and cloud.
Network DLP sits at the perimeter of your network, constantly inspecting all outbound traffic emails, web uploads, FTP transfers. If an employee tries to email an Excel spreadsheet full of PII to their personal Gmail account, the network DLP intercepts the email, blocks it, and alerts the security team.
What about endpoint?
Endpoint DLP lives as a software agent directly on the user's laptops and workstations. It monitors actions happening on the machine itself. It can physically prevent an employee from printing a highly classified document, taking a screenshot of it, or copying it to an unauthorized USB thumb drive.
And cloud.
Cloud DLP does the same thing, but it is integrated natively via APIs into your cloud storage environments, like OneDrive or Google Workspace.
Speaking of the cloud, that brings us to the second technology CASB, the Cloud Access Security Broker. I visualize a CASB as a heavily armed security guard standing at a choke point between my internal corporate network and the vast expanse of cloud applications.
That is exactly its function. A CASB sits logically between your users and your cloud-based resources. Historically, security teams had total visibility when users accessed applications inside the corporate data center. But when the company moved to Salesforce, Microsoft 365, or Workday, they lost all visibility. A CASB acts as a forward or reverse proxy to restore that control.
How does it actually interact with those cloud services? Like, what is it looking for?
A robust CAB provides four critical pillars of security. First, visibility. It logs exactly who is logging into which cloud app and what shadow IT apps are being used. Second, data security. It integrates with your DLP policies to enforce encryption or block downloads of sensitive data from the cloud to unmanaged personal devices.
Right.
Third, threat protection. It uses behavioral analytics to detect anomalous behavior, like a user suddenly downloading 5,000 customer records from Salesforce at 3 a.m. And fourth, compliance. It ensures your cloud configurations adhere to regulatory standards. It extends your on-premise security posture directly into the cloud.
The third technology is DRM, Digital Rights Management, sometimes called Information Rights Management. This one is fascinating because it completely upends the traditional perimeter security model. Usually, if I email you a sensitive file, once it leaves my network gateway, I surrender all control over it. It's in your hands. But DRM changes that completely.
It does. DRM is security that travels with the data itself at the object level. When you apply DRM to a document, you are encrypting the file and attaching an access control policy directly to it. The file must literally phone home to a central licensing server to verify authorization before it allows itself to be opened.
So even if an attacker steals the file or an employee accidentally forwards it to the wrong person, they can't do anything with it.
Correct. The file will check the credentials of the user trying to open it. If they aren't authorized, the file remains locked, ciphertext.
Wow.
Furthermore, even if you are authorized to open it, the DRM policy can prevent you from hitting print, restrict you from copying and pasting the text, or even institute a time bomb where the document automatically revokes access and destroys itself after 72 hours. It protects the data at rest, and it continues to protect it wherever it physically resides.
Now, let's look at how we protect data at the structural level, especially in the context of privacy compliance, like the GDPR. The sources talk about three data obfuscation concepts that are incredibly easy to mix up on an exam: pseudonymization, tokenization, and anonymization. Let's break down the mechanics of each.
Let's start with pseudonymization. This is the process of replacing direct identifying data like a name or an email address with a pseudonym, an alias, or an artificial identifier. Imagine a medical research database. Instead of listing a row of data under the name John Smith, the database lists it under patient 459.
But the critical mechanic here is that it is reversible.
Yes, exactly. Somewhere in the organization, there is a separate, highly secured external data set, a master key or a lookup table, that links patient 459 back to John Smith.
Yeah.
If you have access to that key, you can reverse the process and re-identify the person.
So it's still considered sensitive data?
Yes. Because of this potential for re-identification, pseudonymized data is still legally considered regulated personal data under the GDPR. It is a great security control to limit exposure if the main database is breached, but it does not remove the data from regulatory scope.
Okay, next is tokenization. I like to use a very vivid analogy for this one. Tokenization operates exactly like a coat check at an exclusive museum.
Okay, I like where this is going.
You walk in with a highly valuable cashmere coat. That coat represents a highly sensitive piece of data, like your primary credit card number. The coat check attendant takes your valuable coat, puts it in a highly secure locked vault in the back room, and hands you a cheap random plastic tag with the number 42 stamped on it. That plastic tag is the token.
That is a perfect visualization of the architectural flow.
If a pickpocket bumps into me while I'm walking around the museum and steals that plastic tag, it is completely worthless to them. They can't walk into a store and buy a television with a plastic tag. But when I am ready to leave, I walk back to the desk. The museum system uses that token to verify my transaction, and it fetches my actual valuable coat from the secure vault.
And this is exactly how modern payment processing works. In a retail transaction, the merchant's point-of-sale system and their internal databases never store your actual credit card number.
They just get the plastic tag.
Right. The payment processor takes the real card number, stores it in a heavily fortified token vault, and hands the merchant a randomly generated alphanumeric token. The merchant uses that token for all future billing and analytics.
So if they get hacked?
If the merchant's database is hacked, the attackers steal millions of worthless tokens. They cannot mathematically reverse a token to derive the original credit card number because there is no mathematical relationship between the two. The token is just a random reference pointer.
And finally, anonymization.
If you are looking at global privacy law, anonymization is the holy grail. Anonymization is the process of completely irreversibly destroying any way to identify the data subject. You strip out the direct identifiers, you generalize the secondary data like changing a specific birth date to just a birth year, and you permanently destroy any master key or lookup table.
So there's no way back.
It must be mathematically and practically impossible to link the data back to an individual, even by cross-referencing it with other public data sets.
And because it's impossible to identify anyone, it's no longer personal data.
Which means truly anonymized data falls completely outside the scope and jurisdiction of the GDPR and EPROM. You can share it with third-party researchers, run massive analytics on it, and monetize it without any privacy restrictions, provided the anonymization technique is flawlessly executed and verified.
Which brings us to the final critical act of our life cycle, segmenting data for destruction. Every coat check must eventually close for the night. Every piece of hardware eventually outlives its usefulness, reaches regulatory limits, or loses vendor support. How you end an asset's life is just as critical and heavily scrutinized by auditors as how you begin it. Let's talk about retention, EOL, and destruction.
We begin the end with data retention policies. Organizations cannot just keep data forever by default. You have to carefully balance the business utility of the data with legal requirements and liability risks.
Right, because keeping it too long is bad, but deleting it too early is also bad.
Exactly. From a legal discovery standpoint, keeping old emails for 20 years is a massive liability. If your company is sued, you have to produce all of them. So the business might want to delete emails after 90 days. However, a specific financial regulation might legally mandate that you keep all financial transaction records for exactly 7 years.
So you have to manage those conflicting timelines.
You must define a strict retention schedule for every category of data and then ruthlessly enforce that timeline through automated deletion scripts.
And what happens when the physical hardware and the operating systems holding that data reach EOL, end of life, or EOS, end of support?
This is a massive, incredibly common, and often ignored operational risk. When a vendor declares a product end of support, it means they are no longer writing security patches or providing updates for that operating system or that hardware platform.
Right.
Windows Server 2003, for example, has been EOS for a long time. If a security researcher discovers a new critical vulnerability in that operating system today, Microsoft is not going to fix it. You are entirely defenseless.
You're just sitting there exposed.
Running EOL technology is a ticking time bomb on your network. You must have aggressive lifecycle management processes to migrate data and retire legacy systems long before they reach their EOS dates.
So let's walk through the actual retirement process. Say we are decommissioning an old HR server. It's full of sensitive employee records. I log in, drag all the sensitive folders to the recycling bin, hit empty trash, and we are good to go. We can sell the server on the secondary market.
Right.
Not even close. If you drag a file to the recycling bin and empty it, or even if you execute a standard quick format on the drive, you have not actually deleted the data. The data is still there.
I know this intuitively, but explain the mechanics. What exactly did I delete if the data is still there?
You simply deleted the map to the data.
Go.
Hard drives use a file system and a file allocation table. Essentially a table of contents that tells the operating system exactly which physical sectors on the spinning disk hold the ones and zeros that make up your specific Word document.
Okay, so a table of contents.
When you delete a file using standard OS commands, the operating system simply deletes the entry in the table of contents and flags those physical sectors as available for reuse.
But the actual magnetic ones and zeros representing my data are still sitting untouched on the platter, completely intact. And they will remain there indefinitely until the operating system randomly happens to write a new file over those exact same physical sectors.
So anyone who buys that used server and runs basic off-the-shelf forensic data recovery software can just bypass the file allocation table, scan the raw sectors, and reconstruct my deleted files.
Easily. It takes minutes. This phenomenon is known as data remnants, the residual data remaining on storage media after supposed erasure. It can hide in what we call slack space, which is the unused leftover space within a disk cluster when a file doesn't perfectly fill the block.
Creepy.
On older magnetic drives, it can even exist as residual magnetic flux.
The text mentions a fact about data remnants that absolutely shocked me. It says that data has been successfully recovered from RAM chip's volatile memory that is specifically designed to wipe completely clean the moment you pull the power plug. And they did it using cryogenics.
Yes. This is a fascinating hardware vulnerability known as a cold boot attack. Volatile memory requires continuous electrical power to maintain its state. When you power down a computer, the electrical charges in the RAM capacitors begin to decay rapidly, losing the data.
Right, that's what volatile means.
However, researchers discovered that if you physically freeze a RAM chip with a spray of liquid nitrogen immediately after powering it down, you drastically alter the physics of the capacitors. The electrical charges decay much, much slower.
Wait, so if I drag a file to the recycling bin and hit empty, I haven't actually deleted it, I've just deleted the map to it. And an attacker can literally freeze the RAM, pull the physical chip off the motherboard, plug it into their own forensic machine, and read the contents.
Exactly. And because RAM is where the CPU stores the cryptographic keys used for full disk encryption while the system is running, an attacker can extract the master decryption keys right out of the frozen memory, completely bypassing your data at rest encryption.
That is insane.
It is a highly sophisticated attack, usually reserved for nation-state adversaries or high-end corporate espionage, but it proves that volatile memory is not instantly secure.
That is wild. So, if clicking delete is useless and even turning off the machine isn't instantly secure, how do we actually get rid of data permanently?
We must practice formal, verifiable, defensible destruction. You need documented, auditable proof that the data is gone forever and cannot be recovered by any known means. There are several methods, tiered by the sensitivity level of the data.
What's the first tier?
The first tier is clearing. This is using specialized software to overwrite every single sector of the drive with random ones and zeros multiple times. It sanitizes the drive so the OS can't read it, but it might still be vulnerable to advanced laboratory recovery. It's acceptable for lower-level internal data.
But if I'm decommissioning a server that held top-secret intelligence or millions of patient health records, running a software overwrite program feels incredibly insufficient. How do we escalate the destruction? The next level in the text is purging.
Purging goes beyond software. It is often achieved via degaussing. A degausser is a specialized piece of hardware that applies a massive coercive magnetic force to a magnetic hard drive or tape.
Just blasting it with magnets.
Right. It completely scrambles and randomizes the magnetic flux on the platters, instantly destroying the data.
And it destroys the drive itself, right?
Yes, degaussing destroys the firmware tracks on the drive,
Yeah,
rendering it completely inoperable and physically ruined. It can never be used again. However, there is a critical modern caveat that you must know.
What's that?
Degaussing absolutely does not work on solid-state drives or SSDs. SSDs use integrated flash memory chips, not magnetic platters. A magnet does nothing to an SSD.
So for SSDs, or for situations requiring absolute, unquestionable certainty, we move to the ultimate method, physical destruction.
Yes. Shredding, pulverizing, incinerating. You literally feed the hard drives, tapes, and SSDs into massive industrial metal shredders and reduce them to tiny pieces of metal confetti.
No coming back from that.
No. It is the most secure method available. It provides visually verifiable, defensible destruction. When a compliance auditor asks if the data is gone, you show them a video of the drive being ground into dust, along with a signed certificate of destruction.
But wait, I have a massive structural problem with this. What if all my data is in the cloud? I am a data controller using AWS or Azure as my processor. When I want to permanently destroy a database of customer records, I can't exactly drive over to an Amazon data center, demand they pull a server out of a rack, and ask to feed it into a wood chipper.
No, you definitely cannot do that.
It's a multi-tenant environment, right? My data is sitting on the exact same physical drive as Netflix's data.
It is an excellent architectural challenge. You cannot physically destroy cloud hardware.
Yeah.
For cloud environments, we rely entirely on crypto shredding, sometimes called cryptographic
You walk me
arrangement.
through the mechanics of that.
You mandate that all data stored in the cloud environment is heavily encrypted with strong symmetric encryption, like AES-256. But crucially, you, the customer, must maintain exclusive control over the encryption keys using a key management service.
So AWS doesn't have the key.
Exactly.
Oh.
When it is time to permanently destroy the data, you don't even try to delete the massive petabytes of data itself on the cloud drives. You simply go into your key management service and permanently delete the specific encryption key that unlocks that data.
And without the key, the ciphertext is impossible to read.
It is instantly rendered into permanent, mathematically unreadable gibberish. Even if the cloud provider keeps backups of the encrypted data for years, it doesn't matter. You have effectively shredded the data by shredding the key.
That's brilliant.
It is an incredibly fast, highly effective method of defensible destruction in environments where physical access is impossible.
So what does this all mean? We've walked the entire journey. Let's bring all of this together for a comprehensive summary of what we've covered today. Domain 2, asset security, is entirely about cradle-to-grave protection. You have to master information and asset classification, knowing the rigid differences between government top-secret classifications and business proprietary labels.
Right.
You need to intimately understand the ecosystem of roles, especially the strict legal definitions under the GDPR, distinguishing a data controller who owns the purpose of the data from a data processor who acts on their behalf. You have to understand the entire data lifecycle, from creation to destruction, and how to apply specific cryptographic and operational controls to protect data across its 3 states: at rest, in transit, and the highly vulnerable state of in use.
Exactly.
You need to know how to take a compliance bus line like the PCI DSS and scope and tailor the controls to fit your environment. And finally, you must understand how to achieve defensible destruction through physical pulverization or crypto shredding, completely eliminating the risk of data remnants.
By internalizing these concepts, not just as vocabulary words, but by understanding the deep mechanical frameworks and legal accountability behind them, you will be exceptionally well prepared to tackle these CISSP exam questions on asset security.
But before we sign off, I want to leave you with a final thought to mull over. It draws directly from a historical example brought up in the source material, the Enigma machine from World War II.
It is a brilliant analogy for the challenges we face today. The Enigma cipher was considered virtually unbreakable at the time, but it was eventually breached not just by mathematical genius, but in large part because the human operators failed to follow the lifecycle rules.
Human error.
Always.
Yeah.
They failed to properly destroy old, expired cryptographic keys, and they reused predictable settings.
It was a failure of crypto shredding and lifecycle management in the 1940s.
Exactly. But apply that historical lesson to our modern infrastructure. If we connect this to the bigger picture, today, organizations are legally mandated by regulations to retain mountains of archived, heavily encrypted data for decades. We store this data on aging physical media magnetic tapes, optical disks, early generation SSDs. We lock it in secure vaults.
Right, for compliance.
But consider the long game. Even if you secure the data perfectly today, will you even possess the legacy hardware required to read a magnetic tape in 30 years? Will the specific software versions required to mount the database still exist?
Probably not.
Will the decryption keys have survived uncorrupted? As we rush to digitize and heavily encrypt everything for immediate compliance, we might actually be creating a scenario where our long-term legal retention becomes functionally and technologically impossible. We are securing it so well today that we won't be able to read it tomorrow.
A ticking time bomb sitting in a dusty box in a basement, locked in a vault we forgot the combination to. Thank you for joining us on this deep dive into Domain 2. As you continue to prepare for the CISSP exam, look around your own organization this week. Look at the servers, the applications, the third-party contracts, and practice applying these lifecycle stages and accountability roles to the specific assets right in front of you. Until next time.